Imagine for a moment that you're holding the Bible. And I don't just mean the, thin paperback you might see in a hotel nightstand. I want you to picture it as a physical object, a massive ancient library.
Feel the weight of it.
Yes, feel the weight.
Because that weight is real. It's not just physical, it's historical. You aren't holding one book. You're holding a whole library that spans, over 10 centuries of writing? You've got Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek.
And authors from everywhere. Royal courts in ancient Israel, exiles in Babylon, all the way to the, paved streets of the Roman Empire.
It is a staggering collection of literature.
And when you really look at it that way, as this library of poetry and legal codes, letters, historical records, you run right into a massive problem. Or maybe a challenge is the better word.
Right. The challenge is, how on earth do you read it?
Exactly. How do you make sense of it all?
And that, right there, is the fundamental question we're tackling today. It sounds simple, but it has shaped, the entire Western intellectual tradition.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are definitely wading into some deep waters. We're looking at a concept called hermeneutics.
Which, to put it simply, is just the science or the theory of interpretation. It's the rule book for how we understand what we read.
But we aren't just going to rattle off dictionary definitions today. We have a stack of sources here, philosophical texts, historical analysis that track a seismic shift in how the Western world learned to read this book.
We're talking about a move from a pre-modern world where the Bible defined all of history to the Enlightenment, where suddenly reason and history just started to clash.
And just to be super clear for everyone listening, this isn't a sermon. We aren't telling you what to believe. This is an intellectual history of reading. We're going to look at some absolute heavyweights: Immanuel Kant, Spinoza, Lessing.
These are the figures who represent the moment authority shifted from the page to the reader.
It's a fascinating pivot. You go from the text judging you to you judging the text. So we promised our listeners something chiguyo-igoboki, detailed and deep, and we're going to deliver. Let's start with the problem itself. To really get why hermeneutics is so hard, we need a concrete example.
Yeah, and our source material highlights a great one from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 7.
Oh, this is a perfect place to start because it's so visceral. It really shows the messiness of history that you're talking about.
It does.
So picture the scene. We're in the towns of Judah, streets of Jerusalem, around 600 BCE, and the description sounds almost, domestic. You have children gathering wood.
Fathers lighting the fire.
And women kneading dough. It sounds like a family cookout.
It sounds pleasant.
Right. And they're making cakes. Specifically, the text says they're making cakes for the Queen of Heaven,
which was a deity worshipped right alongside the God of Israel. This was popular folk religion. It's what people actually did.
But God's reaction in the text is not cozy. It is intense. The text says God is provoked to anger, to wrath. He tells the prophet Jeremiah, "Do not intercede for this people, for I will not hear you."
He threatens that his anger will be poured out on humans, animals, even the trees.
So here's the hermeneutical challenge. If you're a reader sitting in a library in 2024 or even 1724, how do you relate to that?
Exactly. Is this just history? A description of what some people did 2,600 years ago?
Or is it a warning? If I bake the wrong kind of cake, is the wrath of God coming for my trees?
And that distinction between what happened back then and what this means for me now, that's the core of the problem. And this brings us to what we might call the old guard.
Before the Enlightenment, scholars had a very specific, very safe way of handling a text like this. Our sources point us to a man named Solomon Glassius.
Glassius, yeah, a giant of the 17th century. He wrote a massive work called Philology Sacra.
He's the perfect representative of the pre-modern method. And what's striking is how systematic he was. He didn't just read by, vibes. He had a checklist.
Oh, he was incredibly rigorous. Glassius argued that to understand any biblical text, you had to answer 7 specific questions. The first 5 are what we would call the historical 5.
Okay, I love a good checklist. Let's run through them.
All right, so when you read Jeremiah, you ask, who is the author? What is the place? What is the time? Occasion? Style?
That sounds pretty standard. That's what any historian does today. You contextualize the document.
True, but it's the next 2, the theological 2, where the pre-modern method really shows its hand. Glassius argued you also had to identify the scopus and the city's doctrinae.
Okay, let's unpack the Latin. Scopus.
It literally means the scope, or the target. Think of it like an aim. In the pre-modern world, they assumed the entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, had one single unified scope.
So they were always trying to harmonize everything with the big picture.
Exactly. They just assumed there were no contradictions. If Jeremiah sounds different from Paul, it's only because you haven't found the scope that connects them yet. The error is always with the reader, never the text.
And the second term, seatus doctrinae.
That means the seat of doctrine. Essentially, is this verse a foundational proof text for a specific dogma?
So when they read about the wrath of God in Jeremiah, they weren't just reading a story about ancient Judah.
No, not at all. They were mining it for the doctrinal seat on, say, divine justice. They would take that verse, strip it of its local context, and connect it to the book of Romans to build a complete systematic theology.
It's like they were fitting pieces into a puzzle box that was already built. They knew what the picture on the box looked like, Christian dogma, and every verse had to fit.
Precisely. For Glassius and his contemporaries, the Bible provided the framework for all of history. The whole world fit inside it. There was no history outside the Bible.
But then, the Enlightenment happens.
And the puzzle box gets smashed. It really does. The 18th century changes the game completely.
So set the scene for us. Why did this system, this harmonious whole, start to crack?
Well, think about the explosion of knowledge happening. You have scientists studying the natural world and realizing the timeline of the Earth might be a bit older than the biblical genealogies suggest.
Right. And historians studying other ancient cultures, Egypt, China, India, that have their own long histories that don't mention Noah or Abraham at all.
Suddenly, the biblical narrative isn't the only history. It has to compete with a natural history of humankind. It's like realizing your family photo album isn't the history of the entire world.
It's just your family's album.
Exactly. It might be true for you, but it's not the universal timeline anymore. And once that happens, the authority of the text starts to wobble.
And this brings us to a figure who really put his finger on this crisis. Gotthold Ephraim Lessing.
Lessing, yeah, a brilliant mind, a dramatist, a philosopher. And he formulated a dilemma that, it honestly still keeps theologians up at night.
Our source material quotes him saying something that almost sounds like a riddle. He said, "Contingent truths of history can never become the proof of necessary truths of reason."
It is a dense sentence, I'll give you that, but it's revolutionary. Let's break it down because this is the key insight right here.
Okay, contingent truths of history.
That just means things that happen to happen. Accidents. Caesar crossing the Rubicon, that family in Jerusalem making cakes for the Queen of Heaven, even the resurrection.
Okay, those are events. They happened, but they didn't have to happen.
Exactly. History is messy. It's accidental. It depends on witnesses, and witnesses can be wrong, they can lie, they can be mistaken.
All right, so compare that to necessary truths of reason.
Those are things like mathematics. 2 + 2 is 4. Or logical moral statements like, it is good to be just. These are true everywhere, always. They don't depend on a witness. You can prove them in your own mind.
So Lessing is saying there's a disconnect.
A massive disconnect. He calls it an ugly, broad ditch that you cannot jump over. He's asking, how can you base your eternal salvation on some dusty historical event that may or may not have happened 2,000 years ago?
That is the crux of it. If my soul depends on necessary truths, but the Bible is full of contingent history, then I have a problem.
You do. And for these Enlightenment thinkers, miracles, which used to be the proof the Bible was true, suddenly became a liability.
They went from being proofs to being, as the sources say, products of mythological imagination.
Right. So if history is messy and unreliable, where do we go? Do we just throw out the book?
And enter the heavyweight champion of philosophy, Immanuel Kant.
Kant looks at this mess, this conflict between ugly history and pure reason, and he offers a solution, but I have to warn you, it's a radical one.
This is really the core of our deep dive today. Kant basically takes faith and splits it in two.
He does. He makes a distinction between two types of faith. On one side, you have Religionsglaub.
Let's take to English. That's religious faith.
Right, religious faith. For Kant, this is the good stuff. It's universal, it's moral, it's based on pure reason, it's about doing your duty, living a good life. It's the God within us.
It's the stuff that makes sense without a book. Be a good person, do unto others.
Exactly. But on the other side, you have Kirchenklau, ecclesiastical faith.
Church faith.
Yes, this is all the statutes, the rituals, the specific historical scriptures, the stories about cakes and arks and whales.
So, for Kant, the Bible falls under church faith. It's secondary.
It's provisional. And this leads to Kant's radical rule for reading. He says that the Bible is an organon.
An organon, a Greek term.
It means a tool, a vehicle. Think of it this way. The Bible is not the source of morality. It's a tool to help us reach morality. It's the bus, not the destination.
Okay, but what happens when the bus goes off a cliff? What happens when the text says something that seems immoral?
That is where Kant gets so controversial.
Yeah.
His rule is this. If you read a text in the Bible, say, a psalm asking for vengeance, or that story about God's wrath, and it seems to conflict with the moral law,
He said stop.
he says you must reinterpret it.
Must. That's strong. He's not just suggesting you ignore it.
No, ignoring it would be too easy. He argues you have a moral obligation to twist the interpretation until it matches the moral law. He essentially says the only authentic interpretation is the moral one.
So even if the text literally says hate your enemy, you have to interpret it to mean something that aligns with love your neighbor.
Yep.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here because I imagine a lot of our listeners are thinking the same thing. That sounds like manipulation.
It does. It sounds like cheating.
If the text says God is angry and Kant says, well, actually, this just means we should be morally upright, isn't he just making the text say what he wants it to say? Is that even honest?
That is exactly what his critics said. They accused him of ventriloquism, of throwing his own voice into the Bible. But look at it from Kant's perspective. He is trying to save the Bible's relevance in a scientific age.
How so?
He believes that if the Bible doesn't promote morality, then what good is it? It's either just empty noise, or worse, it's an obstacle to being a good person. If the Bible tells you to hate, and reason tells you to love, Kant says you have to go with reason.
So he filters the Bible through his own moral conscience.
Exactly. And this is the seismic shift we talked about at the top. The text is no longer the judge of you. You, your moral reason, are now the judge of the text.
That is bold. It places a huge burden on the human being.
It does. And he wasn't alone. We have to talk about Spinoza.
Baruch Spinoza, the lens grinder of Amsterdam. A fascinating figure.
Spinoza had a very similar take, maybe even earlier than Kant. He argued that historical narratives, stories about kings and battles, they don't give you knowledge of God, they just give you trivia.
So what gives you knowledge of God?
Universal notions. Justice, charity, love.
And what's so brilliant is that Spinoza uses the Bible itself to prove his point, right? He quotes the Shema.
He does. He cites Deuteronomy 6, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Spinoza says, look, the Bible itself tells you what actually matters. Love of God and justice. That's it. Everything else is secondary.
He's using the Bible to critique the Bible. He's cutting away the fat to find the steak.
Which brings us right back to Lessing. Because Lessing had a brilliant way of phrasing this whole process. He used a commercial analogy, the difference between the gross and the net weight.
I love this analogy. It's like buying a bag of sugar.
Right. You want the sugar? You don't really want the paper bag. The Bible, for Lessing, has packaging. That's the history, the cultural artifacts, the weird stuff about cakes. That's the gross weight.
But inside, there's the net weight, the inner truth.
The Bible obviously contains more than what pertains to religion. That's his axiom. Not everything in there is religious truth. Some of it is just the wrapper.
This raises the million-dollar question. If we admit there's packaging, how do we know what is the packaging and what's the truth? Who decides?
If you follow Lessing, you decide.
Me.
You. Lessing's answer is entirely subjective. He says it's not about the authority of the book. It's about the experience of the believer. He gives you two tests for any doctrine.
And what are they?
First, does this doctrine feel worthy of God? And second, does it provide consolation to the human heart?
Consolation. That's a feeling. That's an emotion.
It is. He says the proof of the pudding is in the eating. If a teaching helps you, comforts you, makes you a better person, then it has inner truth. If it scares you or seems petty, it's just packaging.
This is a massive, massive shift from Salomon Glacius in his checklist. We went from, what does the text objectively say, to, how does this text make me feel?
That is the Enlightenment revolution in a nutshell. We moved from the text as a dictator of truth to the text as a mirror for our own moral intuition. The power dynamic completely flipped.
Which brings us to the end of our journey, and a man named Johann Gottfried Herder.
Herder is the synthesizer here. He sums up this whole era with a beautiful, simple quote. The Bible must be read in a human way, for it is a book written by human beings for human beings.
Written by humans for humans.
It sounds so obvious to us now, but in the 18th century, that was revolutionary. It means we stop trying to force the text to be some divine magic trick. We accept the errors, the history, the humanity of it all. We treat it like a conversation partner.
So zooming out, what does this all mean for us, for the learner listening who maybe isn't a philosopher but just wants to understand how we got here?
I think the takeaway is that The Enlightenment didn't kill biblical interpretation. It just changed the mission. It shifted the focus from what defines the correct doctrine to what promotes the moral life.
It made the reader responsible.
Entirely. You can't just outsource your morality to the page anymore. You have to engage with it, wrestle with it. You have to sift the sugar from the bag.
And that leads me to a final thought I want to leave with you. It's a bit of a provocation.
Go for it.
If Kant and Lessing are right, if we are the ultimate judges of what is divine in a text based on our own reason and morality, then do we even need the text?
That is the dangerous question.
I mean, think about it. If I'm only accepting the parts that already agree with my God within, am I learning anything new? Or am I just looking in a mirror? Maybe the friction, the weird stuff we want to edit out, the packaging, is actually the most important part because it challenges us.
That is a thought worth sitting with. Does the text change us, or do we change the text?
We'll let you chew on that. Thanks for taking this detailed and deep dive with us.
See you next time.